The night Marcus Hale walked into Aurelius, the most quietly elegant restaurant in the city, he had no intention of falling in love. He had every intention of closing a business deal, drinking expensive wine, and leaving before 10. What he did not plan for was the woman in the blue dress sitting alone at the corner table, her blonde hair catching the amber candlelight like something out of a painting he had no right to be looking at. He noticed her immediately, the way you notice a storm before it arrives, before you understand what's coming, before you have any chance to prepare. He told himself it was nothing. Men like Marcus always told themselves things like that. If you believe in second chances, in unexpected love, and in the kind of truth that breaks you open before it heals you, hit that like button right now, share this story with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to this channel so you never miss a story that moves your soul. Drop a comment below and tell us, where in the world are you watching from tonight? We want to know. Marcus was 34 years old and had spent most of those years building walls that looked, from the outside, like confidence. He was the kind of man people described as magnetic, broad-shouldered, self-assured, the sort of person who walked into a room and made it feel slightly smaller just by being in it. He had built a successful logistics company from almost nothing, driven by a hunger that even he couldn't fully explain. He had dated women, charmed them, and eventually lost them. Not because he was cruel, but because he was absent in all the ways that mattered. His mind was always elsewhere. His heart was always behind glass. That evening, his business associate had canceled last minute, leaving Marcus alone at a table set for two, staring at a glass of red wine he didn't really taste. He had been about to call for the check when a commotion near the entrance pulled his attention. A woman rushing in, slightly breathless, apologizing to the maitre d' in a voice that was warm even in its embarrassment. She was shown to the corner table. She sat down, exhaled as though releasing a week's worth of tension, and then smiled to herself, a private smile meant for no one. And something about that detail lodged itself inside Marcus's chest like a splinter. He watched her without meaning to. She ordered white wine. She read something on her phone, then set it face down on the table the way people do when they've decided the present moment deserves more attention than the digital world. She looked around the restaurant with curious eyes, not the self-conscious glances of someone who felt out of place, but the genuine interest of someone who finds beauty in ordinary things. When her gaze traveled across the room and briefly met his, she didn't look away with the practiced indifference of someone used to being looked at. She simply smiled, politely, openly, the way you might smile at a neighbor you pass on the street. Marcus looked away first. That alone surprised him. He didn't approach her that night. He was not the sort of man who approached strange women in restaurants, despite what his confidence might have suggested to the outside world. Instead, he finished his wine, paid his bill, and stood to leave. And that was when the universe, or fate, or simple coincidence, intervened in the form of a waiter carrying a tray of drinks who miscalculated the distance between himself and the woman in the blue dress. The white wine went sideways. Some of it splashed onto the sleeve of her dress. She gasped, not in anger, just in surprise, and Marcus, who was only 3 tables away, moved before he thought about moving. He was at her side with a stack of cloth napkins from an empty table before the waiter had finished apologizing. She looked up at him with wide eyes, green, he noticed, with flecks of gold near the iris, and there was a beat of silence between them before she laughed. Not a polite, social laugh. A real one, full and unguarded, the kind of laugh that costs something to give. She said it was fine, that the dress was old anyway, that she'd been meaning to spill something on it for years. Marcus found himself laughing too, and the sound of his own laugh surprised him because it had been a while since it had felt so unforced. He asked if he could join her, since his own table was empty, and hers was set for 2, and the waiter clearly felt terrible, and the least the restaurant could do was offer him as compensation. She looked at him for a moment with an expression he couldn't quite read, not quite amusement, not quite caution. And then she gestured to the chair across from her and said simply, "Why not?" Her name was Serafina. She told him to call her Sarah, the way everyone did, and then immediately said she actually preferred Serafina when she had a moment to think about it. He said he'd call her Serafina. She seemed pleased by that, though she hid it quickly. She was a landscape architect, she told him. She designed green spaces for corporate buildings, hospitals, schools. She talked about her work with a quiet passion that Marcus found disarming. He was used to people who performed their enthusiasm, who packaged it for consumption. Serafina talked about plants and soil and the psychology of open space the way someone talks about something they love when they forget they have an audience. She asked about him. He told her about the logistics company and watched for the moment her eyes glazed over, the way they usually did when he talked about freight corridors and supply chain optimization. Her eyes didn't glaze. She asked a follow-up question, a real one, about what had made him want to start the company, not how it worked, but why. The question caught him off guard. He answered honestly, which was rare for him. He told her about his father, a truck driver who had worked himself to exhaustion for 30 years and never owned anything, and how Marcus had promised himself at 17 that he would build something that couldn't be taken away. Serafina listened without filling the silences, which was perhaps the greatest gift she gave him that evening. They talked for 2 hours. The restaurant thinned around them. Candles burned lower. The maitre d' began turning chairs onto tables in the far corners with the discreet efficiency of someone who knows when to hurry people along without being obvious about it. When Serafina finally looked at her watch, her eyes widened, and she said she couldn't believe how late it was. And Marcus felt something in his chest sink in a way he hadn't felt since he was young enough to believe in things without evidence. He walked her to the door. The night air was cool and smelled faintly of rain. She pulled her coat around herself and turned to say goodbye, and he thought, in the particular arrogance of a man who had never really been refused, that something had shifted between them that evening, that the 2 hours they had spent at that table had built something real, that she felt it too, that it was plainly visible in every exchange, every laugh, every question she'd asked him. He asked for her number. She paused, that same unreadable expression, and then gave it to him. He said he'd like to see her again. She said something non-committal and kind, the way Serafina seemed to do everything, and then she smiled that private smile again, the one meant for no one, and walked away into the night. Marcus stood on the pavement outside Aurelius and felt something he hadn't felt in years. He believed with complete and genuine conviction that Serafina had fallen for him that night. He believed she had felt what he felt. He believed the story was just beginning. He did not yet know how wrong he was, and how much more profound the truth would turn out to be. He texted her 2 days later. She responded warmly but briefly. He suggested dinner. She agreed to coffee. He took that as a good sign. He was a man who had always been good at reading rooms, and the coffee felt to him like the beginning of something, a first step in a longer dance. They met at a small cafe near her office on a Thursday afternoon, and Serafina arrived in paint-stained jeans and a cream-colored sweater, her hair pulled back, looking nothing like the woman in the blue dress, and somehow more herself for it. He thought she was even more beautiful. He told himself this was significant. The conversation was easy again, easier even, without the formality of a restaurant setting. She told him about a project she was designing for a children's hospital, an outdoor garden where young patients could sit with their families and feel briefly normal, briefly free. Her voice caught slightly when she described the therapeutic intention behind it, and she looked away for a moment, and Marcus thought he understood why, that she was moved by her own work, that she was the kind of person whose sensitivity ran close to the surface. He was drawn to it the way a man who has spent years in cold rooms is drawn to warmth. But over the following weeks, something began to resist him. He called. She sometimes answered late. He suggested evenings. She preferred afternoons. She was always warm, always genuinely present when they were together, always interested. But there was a door inside her that he could sense without being able to locate, something just beyond the reach of every conversation, a place she didn't take him. He was a man who had never learned to be patient, who had always moved forward by force of will, and the thing he could not force his way through was driving him quietly to the edge of himself. He made the mistake that proud men often make. He interpreted her reserve as hesitation that needed to be overcome. He sent her flowers at her office. She thanked him sincerely and said it was too much. He organized a rooftop dinner with a view of the city skyline. She came, she was gracious, she laughed in all the right places, and at the end of the evening, when he reached across the table and covered her hand with his, she went very still. Not frightened, just still. And she said his name with a gentleness that felt like the beginning of something he wasn't ready to hear. She said they needed to talk. He thought he knew what was coming. He had been rejected before, though rarely, and always in ways that stung briefly and healed quickly. He prepared himself for the familiar bruise. He was not prepared for what Serafina actually said. She told him that she liked him. Genuinely, she said, more than she had expected to. She told him that the evening they met had been one of the most unexpectedly beautiful evenings she had spent in years. She told him that when the waiter had spilled her wine and Marcus had appeared at her side with those napkins, she had thought, for just a moment, that the universe was being ridiculous and wonderful in equal measure. She said all of this looking directly at him, without performance, without softness that was actually evasion. And then she told him the truth. She had not fallen for him that night. She had been healing. 6 months before they met, Serafina had ended a 4-year relationship. Not because she had stopped loving the man she was with, but because she had slowly, quietly, devastatingly realized that loving him was making her disappear. He was not cruel. He was simply immovable, certain of everything, full of a confidence that left no room for her uncertainty, her questions, her need to sometimes sit in the not knowing of things. She had spent 4 years making herself smaller and calling it love. When she finally left, she had spent months reconstructing herself, learning to recognize her own voice again, learning to trust her own instincts, learning to be alone without confusing it with loneliness. The night she walked into Aurelius, she had been celebrating herself. Not with anyone, just herself. She had finalized the children's hospital garden project that afternoon, the one she had poured her heart into, and she had decided she deserved a good meal and a glass of wine and her own company. She had been happy, genuinely, quietly happy, before Marcus appeared. And when he sat down across from her, she had enjoyed the evening not because she was falling for him, but because she was finally, after a long time, someone who could sit across from a charming man and not immediately begin reshaping herself to fit him. She told Marcus that the reason she had continued to see him was not because she was leading him on, but because she had been trying to understand whether what she felt was real affinity or simply the comfort of being chosen by someone who seemed sure. She said she wasn't certain she was ready for what he seemed to want. She said she was afraid that his certainty, the same certainty that had first attracted her, might, over time, leave the same kind of mark that her last relationship had left. Marcus sat across from her in the amber light of that rooftop and felt something crack open in his chest. Not the sharp pain of rejection, something more complicated and more complete than that. Because as she spoke, with that directness and that grace, he recognized with sudden and uncomfortable clarity that she was describing him. She was describing the version of him that had always gotten what he wanted by being certain, by moving forward regardless, by treating other people's hesitation as an obstacle rather than a message. She was not rejecting him, she was showing him himself. He did not speak for a long moment. She waited without filling the silence. She was good at that. He asked her finally what had kept her from telling him sooner. She said she hadn't fully understood it herself until recently. She said that being around him had, unexpectedly, helped her figure out what she needed. Not from him specifically, but from herself. She said she was grateful for that, and she meant it without a trace of condescension. Marcus went home that night and did something he almost never did. He sat quietly with himself. He did not call anyone. He did not strategize. He did not plan his next move. He simply sat in his apartment, in the specific silence of a man who has been shown something true about himself and cannot look away from it, and he let it settle into him the way rain settles into dry earth, slowly, and then all at once. He thought about his father, driving those trucks for 30 years, exhausted and proud. He thought about how he had promised himself he would build something that couldn't be taken away, and how somewhere along the way that promise had metastasized into a need to control every outcome, every room, every person who came close to him. He had been so afraid of his own vulnerability that he had turned his life into a performance of invulnerability. He had not let anyone truly in, not fully, not at the risk of real loss. And he had called that strength. Serafina, without meaning to, had walked into his life in a blue dress and a cloud of wine and dismantled something he had been building for 20 years, and she had done it not by being what he wanted her to be, but by refusing to be. He called her the next morning. He did not know exactly what to say, which was perhaps itself a sign of growth. He told her that he had heard her, really heard her, not just processed her words and formed a counter-strategy. He told her that she had said some things he needed to think about for a long time, and that he was going to think about them. He did not ask her for another chance. He did not try to reframe the conversation in his favor. He simply said, "Thank you," and he meant it in a way he hadn't meant a thank you in a long time. Serafina was quiet for a moment. Then she said that she hoped, sincerely, that he was okay. He said, with the kind of honesty that surprises even the person speaking, that he thought he would be, but not yet. They did not become a love story in the way Marcus had imagined that first night. Life is not a film, and real transformation does not come with a soundtrack and a clean ending. But something shifted between them in the weeks that followed, not toward romance, at least not immediately, but toward a kind of honesty that Marcus had never allowed himself with anyone. They continued to meet occasionally, for coffee, for a walk through the park near her office where she would sometimes stop to examine a particular plant or the way light fell through a certain arrangement of trees. He began to listen differently, not to respond, but to understand. He began to notice things he had spent years walking past. Months later, when Serafina told him that she thought she was ready, not certain, she never claimed certainty, but ready, he did not feel the triumph he would once have felt. He felt something quieter and more durable than triumph. He felt gratitude, not for getting what he wanted, but for becoming someone who had earned the right to try. He believed she had fallen for him that night at Aurelius. But the truth, her truth, had changed everything. It had changed him. And that, he came to understand, was the real love story, not the one he had written for himself in the amber light of a restaurant, the one she had told him, without apology, with every light on, the one that started the moment he finally, truly listened. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of your own moments of growth, of truth, of learning to really hear someone, please like this video right now, share it with someone who needs it, and let us know in the comments what this story made you feel. Your engagement helps more people find stories that matter. Before this story ends, we want to ask you something personal. What is one truth someone told you that changed the way you saw yourself? Drop it in the comments below. You might just change someone else's life with your words tonight. Because sometimes the greatest love isn't the one you fall into. It's the one that shows you who you needed to become. And sometimes the person who changes your life forever isn't the one who tells you what you want to hear. It's the one who is brave enough and kind enough to tell you the truth. Even when the truth changes everything, especially then.